An entire family, father, mother, and 4 children, was found dead in their living room. Stay with us to check if you can uncover the cause of the death, especially the death of the 5-month-old baby that died few days later. On July 4th, a Tuesday, on a busy street in Rumomosi, Port Harcourt, the Wosu family home fell silent. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, unnatural stillness that swallowed the sounds of laughter, of children playing, of life. Inside, Wilson Wosu, his wife, and their 4 young children were about to have dinner. A few days later, they were found, an entire family, gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no gunshots, no blood. The front door was locked from the inside. Just a pot of spaghetti, half-boiled on the stove, a different meal, served from a food flask, left uneaten on the table, and a house that held the scent of a terrible unanswered question. Everyone had a theory. The easy answer, the one that offered a quick, tragic explanation, was generator fumes, a common but devastating accident. Others whispered of something more sinister, poison, a gift of food from a neighbor, a meal bought from an unknown vendor, an act of unimaginable malice. But no theory could explain the most haunting detail of all. No one could understand why the baby, just 5 months old, was the last to die. This is the true story of the Wosu family, a case that has no official answers, only a profound and lasting silence. To understand the silence, you first have to understand the noise that came before it. The Wosu family was the vibrant, beating heart of their small corner of Rumoksu. Their home wasn't just a structure of concrete and zinc roofing. It was an epicenter of life on a street where neighbors were extensions of family. Wilson Wosu was a man known for his gentle smile and the tireless set of his shoulders. He was a civil engineer, a man who built things for a living, but his true masterpiece was his family. He wasn't a man of great wealth, but he was rich in a way that mattered more to him. He was a devoted father. His world revolved around his 4 children, and his return from work each evening was the day's main event, heralded by shouts of "Daddy" from the yard. His wife, a woman whose name meant grace, was the anchor of the family. Her presence filled their small home with a palpable warmth. Her laughter was infectious, a sound that could spill out of the windows and make passers-by smile. Her cooking was a language of love, often shared with neighbors who passed by. A small plate of jollof rice or a piece of fried plantain offered without a second thought. She was the steady hand, the comforting voice, the one who orchestrated the beautiful tumbling chaos of their family life. And that chaos was beautiful. There were 3 daughters, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who had just discovered the magic of reading on her own, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration as she whispered words from a tattered storybook, her voice full of wonder. There was a playful 4-year-old with a mischievous grin and boundless energy, always following her older sister like a devoted shadow. And there was the newest addition, a 5-month-old baby girl whose gurgles and soft milky cries were the home's newest, sweetest melody. Their 2-year-old son, a sturdy bundle of boundless energy, toddled between them all, trying to keep up, his face a constant smear of dirt and happiness. Their home was not large, but it was full of the sounds of cartoons on the television, of the clatter of toys being scattered across the floor, of a mother humming a gospel tune in the kitchen, of a father's tired but happy sigh as he walked through the door after a long day. Their lives were a collection of small, ordinary, precious moments that weave together to form the tapestry of a family. The careful braiding of hair for school, the gentle patching up of a scraped knee, the proud celebration of a good report card, the rhythmic rocking of a baby to sleep under the slow turn of a ceiling fan. They were a family with a future filled with the promise of more birthdays, more school days, more inside jokes, more ordinary evenings spent together around the dinner table. That future was stolen from them on a Tuesday. The silence began subtly, a creeping tide that went unnoticed at first. A neighbor, preparing her own children for school on Wednesday morning, noted subconsciously that she hadn't heard the usual morning sounds of the Wosu children's excited chatter. The front gate, usually open by 7 a.m. to the world, remained shut. Later that day, another neighbor noticed the family's generator didn't kick on during the evening power outage, plunging their home into a darkness that felt different, deeper than the usual. By Thursday, the silence had become a presence. It was a weight on the street. The family's car hadn't moved. The curtains, usually drawn back to let in the morning light, remained closed, giving the house a blind, vacant look. Calls to Wilson's phone and his wife's went unanswered, the rings echoing in an empty house before being swallowed by the robotic voice of the voicemail system. Friends and extended family, scattered across the city and beyond, began a frantic chain of worried calls to one another. "Have you heard from them? Is everything okay?" The answer was always the same, a fearful, confused no. The community's collective unease grew with each passing hour. This wasn't like the Wosus. They were communicative, present. For them to simply disappear without a word, without a sign, was unthinkable. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an absence of life, and it was growing louder with every moment that passed. On the third day of silence, the worry curdled into a thick, suffocating fear. A close family friend, Wilson's cousin, unable to bear the gnawing uncertainty any longer, drove to the house. He knocked, then pounded on the metal door, the sound echoing unnaturally on the quiet street. He called their names, his voice cracking with a desperate edge. He circled the house, peering through the windows, but the glass was fogged from the inside, obscuring the view. He could see nothing but distorted shadows. The only thing he could sense was the profound wrongness of it all. His heart hammering against his ribs, he called the police. When the officers arrived, the street was filled with anxious neighbors, their faces etched with a shared dread. They stood in small, silent groups, watching, waiting. The air was thick and heavy, pregnant with the unspoken. The police forced the door, the sound of splintering wood and screeching metal, a violent intrusion into the unnatural quiet. The first thing that hit them was the smell. It was not the straightforward, sharp odor of recent decomposition they were grimly accustomed to. It was something else, a complex and cloying scent that clung to the back of the throat. The smell of a life interrupted, of food left to spoil, mixed with something heavier, something final. It was the smell of a promise broken. The scene inside was a tableau of domestic tragedy, frozen in time. In the sitting room, the officers found them, 6 bodies, their positions telling a silent, horrifying story that no words could ever capture. Wilson Wosu was on the floor, his body slumped near a chair, as if he had tried to stand, to fight whatever was happening, to reach for something or someone, before collapsing. His wife lay nearby, by the entrance to the kitchen, her posture one of utter surrender, as if she had simply let go, her final breath a sigh of defeat. The children were scattered. The 7-year-old girl was near her father, a book fallen from her hand. The 4-year-old and 2-year-old boy were on the rug in the middle of the room, surrounded by their toys, as if they had simply fallen asleep in the middle of playing and never woken up. A small plastic car was still clutched in the little boy's hand. And then there was the baby. The 5-month-old girl was lying on a sofa, seemingly untouched. She was dressed in a clean white sleeper, her small fists curled peacefully near her face. She looked perfect, almost as if she were napping. Of all the horrors in that room, the sight of the baby, so still, so perfect, was the most gut-wrenching. She was the punctuation mark on a sentence of absolute despair. This was not a scene of violence, not in the way they knew it. There was no blood, no ransacking, no sign of a desperate struggle for life. Valuables were in plain sight, a phone on the table, a wallet on the counter. It was a scene of surrender, as if an invisible silent enemy had entered their home and simply switched off their lives, one by one. As investigators began the grim task of processing the scene, the mystery only deepened and coiled in on itself. The details didn't align with any simple explanation. This was not a straightforward case. It was a puzzle where every piece seemed to contradict the last, creating a picture that made no logical sense. The easy theory, the one whispered among the crowd outside, and initially considered by the police, was generator fumes. It was a common tragedy in Nigeria, a known and silent danger. A family goes to sleep with the generator running, and the odorless, colorless carbon monoxide seeps in, stealing the breath from their lungs. It was a plausible, if heartbreaking scenario that would offer a swift, albeit tragic conclusion. But the scene itself fought against that theory with a silent, stubborn defiance. Why were the windows in the sitting room slightly ajar, letting the thick, humid air circulate? Why was the back door unlocked? A generator's fumes need a sealed space to become lethal so quickly and completely. This house, however, was not sealed. Then there was the food, a detail that screamed of a life in motion, not one winding down for the night. In the kitchen, a pot of spaghetti sat on the stove, the water half-boiled, the pasta still hard and brittle. The wife had been in the middle of preparing a meal. This wasn't a family that had gone to bed for the night. This was a family preparing for dinner. This single detail shifted the entire timeline of the tragedy. Whatever happened, it happened in the early evening, a time when generators are running all over the city, but rarely with all the doors and windows shut tight against the heat. On the dining table, another meal sat waiting, adding another layer of confusion. A large food flask, the kind used for takeaways, was open. The food inside, a different dish, perhaps a rich stew or a local soup, was untouched. It seemed to have been brought from outside. Had a neighbor dropped off a meal as a gift? Had they ordered it? And why were there two different meals being prepared? Was one meant for the adults, and one for the children? The questions multiplied with no answers in sight. The most disturbing piece of the puzzle, however, was the state of the bodies, particularly the baby. When the medical examiner arrived, a methodical, quiet man who had seen death in all its forms, he made a chilling observation that would haunt the investigation. While the parents and older children showed several days of decomposition, consistent with the timeline of their disappearance, the 5-month-old baby girl was different. Her body was still fresh. There were far fewer signs of decay. The horrifying, almost unbelievable implication was that she had not died at the same time as the rest of her family. This single, medically confounding fact shattered every simple theory. Carbon monoxide would have taken the baby first. A potent poison, swift enough to fell 5 people, would have done the same. How could a 5-month-old infant survive for a day, maybe even longer, alone in a house with her deceased family, only to perish shortly before being discovered? Did she die from dehydration, from the toxic air created by the decomposing bodies? The thought was almost too horrific to contemplate. It suggested a prolonged agony, a final lonely chapter to the tragedy that was almost more cruel than the initial event itself. It meant that for a time there was still life in that silent house, a tiny helpless life, crying, waiting for a rescue that came too late. This wasn't just a case of simultaneous death, it was something far more complex, something that felt calculated and monstrously cruel. With the generator theory now seeming increasingly unlikely, the focus of the investigation, and the neighborhood gossip, shifted entirely to the food. The whispers on the street grew louder, turning from sorrowful speculation about an accident to hushed, fearful accusations of murder. Poison. It had to be poison. The food flask on the table, the meal brought from outside, became the dark centerpiece of the mystery. Who had given it to them? The question echoed through the community, planting seeds of suspicion. Neighbors who had shared laughter and food just days before now looked at each other with new eyes. A family doesn't just die like that. Someone had to be responsible. Stories began to emerge, fragmented and unreliable, the way they always do in the wake of an unthinkable tragedy. One neighbor claimed she had seen an unfamiliar delivery driver on a sleek motorbike stop outside the Wosu house on that fateful Tuesday afternoon, handing over a package. Another neighbor, a woman who sold provisions from her small shop, swore she had seen a woman, a distant relative perhaps, leaving the house in a hurry later that evening, her face veiled, refusing to make eye contact. Were these genuine memories, flashes of the truth, or just the mind trying to create order out of an unbearable chaos? The police investigation was immediately, and perhaps deliberately, hampered. By the time they arrived on the scene, the food in the flask was gone, the spaghetti in the pot had been disposed of, the pot itself and the food flask had been washed clean. In a case where the most likely cause of death was poison, the primary evidence had been meticulously destroyed. Who could have done this? Did a well-meaning but panicked family member, in a state of shock and grief, clean the house before realizing the implications? Or did someone with a more sinister motive, the killer themselves, return to the scene to erase their tracks, confident that the deaths would be mistaken for an accident? This missing evidence left a gaping void at the heart of the case, a void that was quickly filled by rumor and fear. The investigation turned to the family's life, searching for a motive, for a shadow that might have fallen over their seemingly happy existence. Did Wilson have enemies? Were there business deals that had gone sour? Was there a family dispute over land or inheritance? A hidden jealousy that had festered into an act of unimaginable violence? But the Wosu family, by all accounts, was beloved. They were a peaceful, hard-working family, with no known conflicts. They were devout, active in their local church, and known for their kindness and generosity. The search for an enemy, for a monster capable of such a cold-blooded crime, turned up nothing but dead ends. There was no one to point to, no one to blame. The lack of a suspect, combined with the lack of evidence, created a perfect storm for speculation. The mystery deepened, becoming darker and more tangled with each passing day. The story was no longer just about a tragic death. It was about a perfect crime, a crime where the killer had not only taken the lives of 6 innocent people, but had also managed to make the evidence, and themselves, vanish completely into the humid Port Harcourt air. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of the Wosu family became a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered in the community of Rumozi. The home was sealed, a monument to the tragedy it held, its silence a constant, unnerving presence on the busy street. The silence that had begun on that July evening became permanent, a scar on the neighborhood. For the surviving relatives, the grandparents whose world had collapsed, the aunts and uncles whose grief was a physical weight, the pain was compounded by a torturous lack of closure. How do you mourn a family when you don't know how or why they died? Every theory was a new source of pain. The idea of an accident was heartbreaking. The idea of murder was unbearable, an evil too vast to comprehend. They were left to grapple with the impossible, soul-crushing questions. Was it a neighbor, someone who smiled at them every day, who delivered their death sentence in a food flask? Was it a stranger, with an unknown motive, a random act of malevolence? Or was it something else, something that defied all rational explanation? The most haunting question of all remained the fate of the baby. Her lonely, delayed death was a special kind of horror that her family could not escape. They imagined her final hours, alone in that silent room, her weak cries unanswered. It was a thought that would torment them for the rest of their lives, a detail that made this tragedy uniquely cruel. With no arrests made, no official cause of death ever determined, and no new leads, the case grew cold. The initial media frenzy faded, replaced by other headlines, other tragedies, but for the community, the memory remained raw. The Wosu family's story became a symbol of the fragility of life and the terrifying reality that sometimes there are no answers. Sometimes the why is a void that can never be filled. The silence of the Wosu house is a reminder of the 6 lives that were stolen, of the laughter that was extinguished, and of the questions that still hang in the heavy Port Harcourt air. It's a testament to the fact that the most devastating mysteries are not the ones with complex clues, but the ones with no clues at all, the ones that leave behind nothing but a profound, aching silence, and the ghost of a life that was about to be lived. A pot of spaghetti on a stove, a food flask on a table, a family gathered for a meal they would never eat. The case of the Wosu family is not just an unsolved mystery, it is an emotional wound on a community that may never fully heal. It's a story about how quickly a home full of life can become a tomb, and how the simplest of domestic scenes, a family preparing for dinner, can mask the most horrific of truths. We are left with the ghost of a question. What happened in that room? Was it a simple, tragic accident that was complicated by a series of strange and misleading circumstances? Or was it a meticulously planned act of evil, carried out by a killer who simply walked away, leaving a family to die in silence, and a baby to follow them into the darkness? We may never know, but the story of Wilson Wosu, his wife, and their 4 beautiful children serves as a heartbreaking reminder that the deepest darkness can be found not in the shadows of the night, but in the ordinary, in the quiet moments just before dinner. And sometimes, the most terrifying silence is the one that follows a life that has been inexplicably and completely erased. Please like, subscribe and ring the bell, because together, we keep their memory alive, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there will find the answers.